Hello everyone and welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today we are just going to talk briefly about selling quail hatching eggs. They are a little bit different than chicken hatching eggs. So the first thing you should consider is, are you actually going to try to make a little bit of money with your quail hatching eggs? Because if you are, you have to approach it a little differently. You could just take quail hatching eggs, say you have some, sell them cheap, throw them in a box. If you have any competition at all in your area, and we have a little bit, you have to be a little more professional about it. So I package hatching eggs in these plastic cartons. I prefer the plastic cartons for hatching eggs. I prefer cardboard cartons for eating eggs. Okay? So I package them in this. You can use whatever carton you like. I like these ones because they are a little sturdier. So if you have a cardboard carton, they're actually easier to squish on the bottom. You actually can crush this really easily. These have a little more stability depending on the type you buy. So buy yourself a good quality carton. You can sell them in this if you want. These are also more expensive where I am. So it's actually cheaper for me to use these plastic ones. These ones are easier to clean. People are more likely to bring them back to get refilled. These kind, they're really hard to clean. You can't really clean the cardboard ones. So you want to be able, especially because you're putting unwashed eggs in them. Remember, you are not washing hatching eggs. You do not wash them. So the first thing you have to decide is if you're going to sell them in cartons or just throw them in a box. I would recommend getting some cartons. If you have regular customers, maybe give them a 25-cent discount per dozen if they bring these cartons back to you. Okay, so that you can clean them and reuse them. Where I am, you are absolutely allowed to reuse cartons for hatching eggs. You are not allowed to reuse cartons for eating eggs. Okay, so that's cartons. Now let's talk about the eggs themselves. First of all, quail eggs, you can't clean them. You cannot. If they have muck on them, you could try to pick it off with your fingers. It is very, very difficult to clean a quail egg because the shell tends to come off with the muck. So the first thing you want to do when you're setting up for hatching eggs, make sure your pens are clean. It is so much easier to just collect an egg that is already clean than it is to try to clean eggs that have got muck on them. So start with clean eggs. If you're selling those eggs, if you want to hatch them yourself in your own incubator, you can set whatever you like. It doesn't matter if they have muck on them. You could try it. Why not? But if people are going to pay for eggs, they're not going to pay for mucky eggs. So sell only the cleanest eggs, but do not ever wash them. You can't wash hatching eggs. You simply can't do that. It'll destroy their ability to hatch at all. Your hatch rate will plummet. So when you collect the eggs, you're going to want to sell them as fresh as possible. Quail eggs are real tiny. They're little guys. And they dry out really, really fast. So you can't keep them as long as you can chicken eggs. Yes, I've hatched quail eggs that were a couple weeks old, but the hatch rate plummets much faster than it does with chicken eggs. So if you're going to sell hatching eggs, you're going to want a fair amount of hens so that you can collect a fair amount of eggs at a time. Right? So I don't sell them if they're more than about 5 days old. I set them in my own incubator if they're up to 14 days old, but I do not sell them if they're more than 5 days old. And I don't ship quail eggs. I sometimes will ship chicken eggs. I do not ship quail eggs. If you are going to ship quail eggs, do the absolute best you can. Ship them in foam egg shippers. Ship them packaged really, really well. Ship them only on a Monday so that they get to their destination by Friday. And if they can't get there in time, don't ship them at all. I do not like shipping quail eggs. They're so tiny, so fragile, they often don't survive. So, if you're going to ship them, fine. But beware. The other thing to talk about is hatch rate. You should not sell quail eggs or any eggs if you haven't tested your own fertility. If your fertility, your hatch rate, your fertility rate, so the eggs that develop, is not more than 90%, don't sell them. People do expect them to develop. Now, you can't control what people do with those eggs. Obviously, you can't control it. But don't sell them if they're less than 90%, because then at least you can say, I get 90% hatch rate. I don't know what you're doing, but I get 90% hatch rate. I had a lady who bought 4 dozen eggs for me, and I get about a 96% hatch rate when I set my own eggs. And out of 4 dozen eggs, she only had 3 hatch, and she was mad at me. And then in talking to her, it turns out that what she did was she left the eggs in her hot car. She left the eggs in her hot car all day. So you can't guarantee hatch rate because obviously leaving them in the hot car all day killed them. But you should not sell them before you're sure of your own fertility. To that end, you want to have no more than 1 male to 3 female quail. Okay, I like a 1 to 2 because that really ups my ratio. But if you're going to sell them as hatching eggs, you need 1 boy to 3 females. Just because females get missed if you go more than that. Could you do a 1 to 4 or even a 1 to 5? Sure, but then some of those eggs will simply not have been fertilized. So 1 to 3 is ideal. I prefer 1 to 2, but 1 to 3 will get the job done. Now you want to talk about storing them. You need to be careful with quail eggs. Like I said, they dry out really, really fast. So store them fat end up and rotate them. So I put them in cartons. So if I'm going to sell, I put them in cartons like this, ready to go, ready to sell. This dozen's ready to sell, except this carton's empty. Pretend it's not. And what I do is every day, I have a little block. We'll pretend that's my block. My block's in the mudroom. And I pop it up on the block like that. And then every morning I come around and I just rotate the cartons. And then I usually have a line of cartons. And I just rotate them. It's really important to rotate quail eggs while they're sitting because they're so tiny. If you don't do that, it's really, really easy for those yolks to stick to the shell. So it's more important with quail eggs than with chicken eggs that you're turning them every day. So that's what I do. I just pop them up. You can buy turners and store them on actual automatic turners that rock them for you. You can do that. But I just use cartons. I just do that every day, flip them around. So I have a schedule. Every morning after I've gone out to look after the animals, I just turn my cartons. I'm not selling hatching eggs right now because it's November and quail do not lay in November, at least where we are, unless I want to give them artificial light, which I do not. But if you're really going to get into selling quail eggs for hatching or even for eating, you do want to consider whether or not you want to have a light on. Remember, you do not want that light on 24 hours a day, no more than 16 hours. They need to rest. So you can add a light if you like. I don't, but you absolutely can if you like. So we've talked about storing them. We've talked about your hens. Make sure your hens are fed. You can get some foods that are formulated specifically for birds that are laying hatching eggs. I find that a waste. Just feed them. I like turkey starter because of the protein levels and offer them eggshells or oyster shells on the side. Either way, you can do it however you like, but it's a waste to try to buy a special diet for quail. They don't really need that much. So the other thing you have to know is, like everything else, you have to get your name out there. So advertise, tell people you're selling these eggs, post your own hatchlings, your own little chicks, all over your Facebook pages, all over your Instagrams, whatever you have, just so people can see you hatch all these babies, you love hatching all these babies. Other people might love hatching all these babies too. Just remember, do not guarantee hatch rate, no matter how good your own hatch rate is, because you do not know what people are doing. That's my biggest gripe when I'm selling hatching eggs. If someone will come back and say, well, they didn't hatch, but I didn't set them for a week and a half after I bought them. Okay, half of them were dead. So do not guarantee, especially with quail eggs, because quail eggs are a little different, and not everybody knows how to hatch them. Not everybody knows that they only take 17 days to go from start to finish for hatching. Not everybody knows that you can't have them set higher than 37.5 Celsius or 99.5 Fahrenheit because then they roast, right? Not everybody knows that. There's a little less wiggle room with quail. So don't guarantee your hatch rates. I get excellent hatch rates at home, and most people who buy my eggs get excellent hatch rates. But the few who don't, it's not your fault if they don't hatch, if they were not handled the same way you handle them. But never sell hatching eggs until you've hatched a whole bunch yourself and you know how many you expect to hatch. The final thing to talk about is pricing. Do not undersell yourself. Just like with eating eggs, hatching eggs have a market value. You don't want to sell a dozen hatching eggs for $1. So where we are, hatching eggs will go anywhere from $8 to $10 a dozen for just mixed colors to up to about $25 a dozen for like black only or something like that. And sometimes I do that. Sometimes I separate my pens. So you want to consider doing that as well. If you have certain colors that you want to reproduce, separate them out because you're more likely to get a really good color if you separate your colors. So if you want only blacks, put your blacks together, and then you're likely to get better black chicks than you would if you just randomly hatched, because you'll get some black chicks, but they might not be pure black, or they might not be as deep a black as their parents because they got mixed with something else. So if you want to sell specific colors and then you can charge more for your hatching eggs, make sure your pens are well separated. Separate them for at least 2 to 3 weeks before you sell those eggs as from that pen. It does take 2 to 3 weeks for the females to have only mated with the male they're with. Okay, so they can retain the sperm of the male for a few weeks. So 2 to 3 weeks minimum before you can claim, hey, these are all going to be black chicks. And make sure you do at least 2 test hatches to make sure you know what you're getting. So, in summary, get yourself out there, treat your birds well, make sure that you store your hatching eggs well. Do not sell old eggs. Sell clean eggs, but not washed. And don't guarantee your hatch rate. That's about it for making money selling quail eggs for hatching. We will do one more small video on selling live birds where we'll go outside, look at our live birds, and I'll talk to you about selling chicks. But in the interest of not making this video too long, I'm not going to do that today. I will post that video tomorrow. See you then.